All right, I'm hoping everyone can see my screen. My name is Warren Paul Anderson. I'm the head of developer relations at Ripple. I've been at Ripple for about 4 years, primarily working as a product manager, building out some of the core blockchain protocols that Ripple's been building out. So Ripple's a early blockchain crypto company that's based in San Francisco with 9 different offices across the world. We focus on blockchain, using blockchain to reduce friction in payments. We think that blockchain is particularly good at actually reducing, friction and making payments simpler. Particularly, I actually work on the Xpring team at Ripple, which is building out an open developer platform for money that we're using open source software, open networks, and open standards to build an actual full stack platform for developers to integrate payments. So for some of you may kind of remember, that information, used to be like incredibly siloed. So, back in the 80s, you couldn't send an email outside of your network. You actually had to send email within the same network that you were on. Then SMTP came out and kind of broke that barrier. People, used to fax documents. My dad still faxes documents. He thinks that's a great way to send information. But we've evolved from that, thankfully. And also, you used to buy CDs, at the local record store or something, $20 a pop. It had 10 songs you had to carry around in your disc player. Carrying around music was kind of a pain. I was raised in the 90s, so I remember like running to Hot Topic and picking up a bunch of punk rock CDs, that I knew that were coming out, and then coming home and loading them up in my CD player. But this was the state of the art at that point. When it came to like actually transferring information on computers, USB drives used to be sent around. I remember doing homework, saving on a USB drive, transferring it to another workstation where I continue working on that. And that was really kind of just, there was a lot of friction in that, but we were okay with it because that's what everyone else did. But now, the internet, we take for granted all this stuff, right? Email's free and instant. Texting is even free and instant. You can get all the music you want for $10 a month, like on Spotify. This is really kind of the internet has opened up the boundaries for sharing information. So why, we don't really think about these things and like the actual underlying kind of protocols that actually made these work, right? So, the state of the world right now when it comes to payments is that it's still kind of in that kind of world where you have a bunch of siloed networks. So why isn't moving money like this? Like why can't you actually move money freely between different payment applications? So payments right now are actually divided by very siloed networks. They're very exclusionary. You have, as a developer, you have to integrate in all these different payment types just to get paid for your application. If you're an application developer that's building out a new payment type, you have to compete with all these other different siloed networks, and none of them are interoperable. One of the examples I use is the fact that like a Venmo user, I personally love Venmo, but I can't pay a PayPal user even though they're platforms that are built and maintained by the same company. And we know people at both those, working on both those products, and they've actually tried to integrate or interoperate them, and it's actually quite hard because there's no single protocol that helps to interconnect these. So, even moving kind of data, through technology is now like instant. We can send an email to anyone in the world and it gets there in seconds. It's free. Payments are not that case, right? So sending money today it can take, businesses, it can take hours. They're restricted to Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Merchant payouts can take anywhere from 2 to 30 days. We've recently seen, organizations like, Square and PayPal even hold money for longer than that to account for risk with, the financial climate. And then when it comes to international payments, the standard is really 3 to 5 days, which can take even longer. Some people use Stripe. Stripe still takes, a couple days. It's pretty expensive. Google Play, if you're an app developer, and you're getting actual, paid by Google Play, it could actually take, days to actually get paid for, the recurring subscription that you're getting. So this unreliability is we think is like very unacceptable. So there's a lot of ways, you can pay. And interestingly enough, there was over 7 billion checks that were actually written actually just last year. So people still write checks. I had to write a check a couple weeks ago. I didn't have a checkbook, but that was the payment method that the merchant accepted. So I had to go find a check, pay the bank like $5 just to print out a piece of paper with my account information on it. But that's kind of been the state of the world. And I think we're all ready for the state of the world to change. So really, what this kind of amounts to is collectively there's over $1.5 trillion worth of fees that are charged, for consumers like ourselves, for developers. This is a really high tax to do something that's pretty simple and that, the internet has made available for information. So, you can take and aggregate all the middlemen in between the customer and the merchant. And this is quite, and sometimes there's even more when you're talking in the international transfer of money, right? So you have issuing banks, you have card networks, you have acquiring banks, you have payment gateways and processors. This is like a lot of middlemen that each take a cut. And really what this results in is financial exclusion. So, there's still 25 million Americans that are underbanked. A lot of people, prefer to use cash because opening up a bank account can be, for some people, it can be a little bit intimidating. You have to come up with, address information, a lot of personal information you have to give to that bank. People aren't necessarily comfortable with that. But if you expand it globally, 2 billion people are underbanked. And there's reasons for this. There are the banks are kind of the gateways to the payment industry. And we think that there's a huge opportunity to help reduce that friction, right? We still see $35 billion worth of payment fraud every year. That's collectively across the market. So banks really aren't in a position to be able to not just prevent, not just like after the fact kind of check the fraud, but prevent the fraud, right? And this is a result of the fact that these systems are so fragmented. As developers, we look for ways to be able to build applications that can do network analysis. We rely on preventative analytics so that we can get ahead of problems before they're actually there. But these networks don't really have that to support that. So, payments can still be pretty painful for customers, right? So 70% of e-commerce abandonment rates are actually due to payments. So when you have a customer that's you finally got them through the funnel, and they're at the point of sale, they usually leave because of the payment experience. They have to pick a card, or they have to pick a different payment network. They have to fill in all this information, and they have to do that with every purchase. So this is just become a big problem, right? We expect kind of that one-click purchase. I think everywhere we go, thanks to Amazon, they've made it really simple, but expanding that to every single application has been quite difficult. And then once you actually get through that, then as a developer, you're still looking at 2 to 3 day settlement times, lots of payment failures, and a lot of unreliability that your payment's actually going to get there. So for developers, we have to incorporate all these different payment systems just to satisfy the needs of users, right? Users may have that one payment application that they love and they want to use. And if your application doesn't support it, they're going to ditch. And that's not the experience that we want, right? So looking back, kind of how did the internet actually solve these problems for information? If you kind of step back a little bit, there are some core principles that the internet used that we think could be useful for actually transferring value. So the internet's global, it's available everywhere. It's scalable, it's capable of meeting the global demand, right? It's open, meaning anyone can access it, and it's becoming more and more wide scale, whether you're doing it direct through like satellite or in networks that you connect to through an ISP. It's pretty reliable. It works good. It's pretty good. The connection is pretty good. It has redundancy, so even if a network falls over, it's back online pretty quickly, and it's also interoperable. So it abstracts all these other networks that you're connecting to. You don't have to worry about your network not being connected to another network. So I always say this is why protocols designed for PDP-10s still work with iPhones, because the standards are so simple that they still are applicable to today's modern kind of devices. So we believe that we're kind of at the very beginning where we can actually unlock value. The internet represents 21% of global GDP. 92, a good day on the internet was about 100 gigs of data that was transferred. We're seeing, and there's expectation, there's about 150,000 gigs that are going to be transferred per second on the internet. So we think this is going to be a huge growth sector for the internet, and we're just really at the beginning stages of it. So how do we actually solve these problems for money? How do we take these core principles, apply them to the transfer of money? So we've spent years working on this problem. One of the protocols that we've developed is called Interledger. So this is a interoperability protocol for all payments and all currencies. So this is like similar to your TCP/IP for money, essentially. And what it does is it sits on top of these existing networks and allows a unified payment messaging to happen, because payments are really split into messaging and settlement. And Interledger does a really good job at standardizing the messaging in order to allow for the settlement. So Interledger, similarly to the internet, it's available everywhere. It is capable of meeting global demand. It's accessible; anyone can access it. It is reliable. It kind of rests on the existing networks and tries to mimic as much of the internet protocol as possible. And most importantly, it abstracts away all those networks so that you can actually interoperate with the different networks. So the grand vision, if Venmo and PayPal were both running on Interledger, those two payment networks could interoperate, and you wouldn't have to join each other's networks in order to pay each other. So we've also spent quite a few years, almost a decade now, working on something called the Xmp Ledger. So the Xmp Ledger is the native blockchain for XRP, which is a native digital asset. Similar to Bitcoin, it was created in 2012, and it's really kind of geared for instant payment settlement. So the first time I said an XRP transaction was about 5 years ago, and the funds went from my wallet to my friend's wallet in 3 seconds. And that was really like an eye-opener for me, because it was the first time I've actually seen money move like actual information or like an email. And I kind of thought, like, this is how it should be. As a developer, it's really cool because when you're actually building these applications and you're doing the testing and everything, you get that real-time settlement where sometimes you need days in order for get confirmation that the funds are there. So combining Interledger and XRP, something kind of magical happens, right? You basically get to use the settlement speed of Xrp Ledger, which is 3 to 5 seconds, and the interoperability of Interledger, which can support multiple different banks, multiple different blockchains. It could support multiple different applications for money and online wallets. But with the two combined, you really get that full kind of like that TCP/IP kind of stack where you have instant actual settlement of funds and then the messaging that speaks to different networks. So we've seen actual research that shows that for every 1% increase in digital payments, the world GDP increases by $100 billion. And that's pretty powerful, right? And we think that by unlocking this value, that entirely new business models are actually going to be created. So we see a lot more the streaming economy, where you have Twitch users that are actually streaming, game developers that are streaming. We are starting to see payment models that actually can be built to kind of complement this streaming content. We're actually streaming payments in addition to the actual content. We think that's really powerful. Similar to back in the day when the internet was started, I'm sure the amount of use cases weren't even thought of before people started actually building on them. But we think that this technology could actually inspire new business models. So our vision is really to make money move like information moves today, using kind of those core components. We call it the Internet of Value. It's kind of taken on a bit of a whole different sector of its own, where money is actually moving much like email. So Ripple classically builds software for financial institutions. We have over 300 financial institutions that are running on something called RippleNet. RippleNet's an enterprise, proprietary payment network that's utilizing this technology to build like a massive network that can interoperate with other networks. And then Xpring is this open platform for money. So in Q1, we actually saw Xpring. It was the fastest growing developer platform across all major blockchains, according to GitHub Insights. So we're starting to see some traction here. And we think it's because of the openness of the actual platform. When I say openness, I'm talking about open standards, open source software, in a full open stack. So all the way down to the network layer, you have everything that's completely open. And that's a pretty unique proposition for developers to use. So as a platform, we also offer tools. We host services, we host APIs and services to help get you started. And then we do programs like advocacy. We have capital programs that can help kind of get you started from a capital perspective. And we offer those programs, for developers all around the world. When we talk about money, what we're really talking about are all types of money. So this is fiat, this is like US dollar or your denominated currencies, cryptocurrencies, and then also tokens, which are digital representations of things that are like offline, right? You could have a tokenized baseball card or something like that. But we think that those types of digital kind of goods are going to become particularly valuable in like the gaming industry. So as just like a kind of a complete picture here, Xpring works on protocols. We work on the Xrp Ledger, Interledger. We do have more protocols kind of that we're working on that we're going to be releasing shortly. We work on tools. We have a wallet, which is a reference wallet. It's open source that you can actually use it to kind of see like how you could potentially build it almost like a template. We have an amazing SDK that takes all of this, technology and condenses it down to about 23 lines of code. So you can create an account, you can submit a transaction, you can check a transaction to confirm that it's been sent, and then you can check your balance. And those are the 4 primary kind of features that we think that is useful for this type of application. We have a few REST APIs that are great for developers of any language. The SDKs, actually, we support Java, JavaScript, and Python. There's a variety of other different SDKs out there that are kind of community run that we think that are, I think there's a total of 7 different languages that the SDK supports. And then we also have a command line interface that is useful for developers to kind of get started. Some of the services we offer, we run what we call test networks. So test networks are kind of like sandbox environments. Anytime you're developing, an application with real money and something goes wrong, that could be potentially dangerous. So we offer up test networks. It's play money, it's faux money. And then we also offer a dev network, which is kind of the latest beta of all of our releases. So you can get a glimpse of what's coming down the pipeline. We maintain a Ledger Explorer, which is, you can think of as kind of like, this is like the search for blockchain. So you can look up transactions, accounts, all that type of stuff, because all this information is very public. And then a data API, which helps to aggregate a lot of the kind of search parameters into different fields. So some of the developers that we're shipping for, at the bottom layer, the network infrastructure. So these are core developers, these are protocol developers, server administrators. The market infrastructure, these are developers that are building out exchanges, wallets, kind of some of like a lot of the infrastructure that helps to like custody some assets and send and receive assets as well. The application developers that we see kind of joining kind of this community they're building out new content, whether it's video content or written content. We see a lot of game developers. So, virtual currencies in games actually started way before cryptocurrencies. And now we see that kind of bridging a little bit more. We're targeting the 20 million developers worldwide. Because we believe that in the future, especially now, like applications, whether they're, charging for money or helping people, transfer value more, are going to become really native to this Internet of Value, where, you will be able to exchange value for goods and services through these applications in something as simple as like just a 20-line, SDK. So we want to build that and make sure that developers have the right tools to be able to incorporate that. Great way to get involved. We have a lot of different documentation, probably 8 years of different documentation, and lots of things to read. I'm not sure if we have time for questions, so I think I have a few questions here. Does Stripe and Braintree work the same way with Zoom, PayPal Sister? Which is again interoperable between the two? How do the middlemen come into this when you do an international transfer? So the important thing about this technology is there's no middleman. So this is all peer-to-peer technology. So you don't have to rely on middlemen in order to actually make the transfer work. The middlemen are kind of abstracted away or removed from the equation. Peer-to-peer technology, I think, is like what the basis of a lot of our the way that we move information on the internet today. And so we think we're going to move into a more of a peer-to-peer economy with value. I would think the largest barrier to something like Interledger would be the 1.5 trillion in fees that are collected globally to get them switch over. Would mean to give up those revenues that come. So what incentive do these siloed providers have to use service reach? Great question. So with any new technology, there's new ways to make money. For Interledger in particularly, Interledger runs, there are routers in the actual network that can charge for fees. So they can charge streaming fees, they can charge FX rates. We actually envision that banks are going to become a lot more like internet service providers in the future, where they are just routing, money all over the world, and that they're able to charge a fee for that. And we think the banks that adopt this technology earliest are going to be the early winners in this new economy. So we're really excited about the whole bank ISP relationship and seeing how that actually evolves. Interledger seems super interesting, but speaking of it globally, will that be applicable to all payment APIs globally, or will it just be applicable to US-based APIs? So Interledger is global by default. We see a lot of interesting projects happening actually in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is particularly siloed because there's so many countries in such a small geographic area. A lot of them have different currencies. So those siloed kind of geographies are particularly good and quick at adopting these. I think that's all we have time for, but thank you very much for listening, and be sure to check out any of these sites, and we're happy to answer any questions.